Okay, before I get into refuting some of the specific points in Ketwolski's little video about the merchandising issues regarding Star Trek as it is currently, I recommend everybody go if you got Netflix, check out the series I got on there, The Toys That Made Us. The first episode is about Star Trek toys. And I'll just touch on this briefly before getting into the things here. Merchandising for TV shows is a little viewed a little more assured than for movie, and this is especially back in the day before Star Wars became the juggernaut that it was. Because back then it's like, yeah, movies are hit or miss. Before merchandising for movies before that had always been sort of, movie merchandise never really moved that much. TV shows, you got a series, you got a thing, and more commitment. Then that was a little more of a sure thing. You saw more TV show merchandise, and that's why you got the label slapping stuff on. Doesn't matter how nothing to do with showing up. Put a Star Trek label on it, it'll sell. Somebody's gonna buy it. And then of course when the Marty Abrams, who is back by the way, he's through some or other, Mego was back amongst the living, and they're making Star Trek toys again. Although it's all the original series, in case you didn't notice. I think they had a kind of dip in the water with Diamond Select Limited Edition. They did some next gen figures too, but it's all the classic Mego 8-inch figures. And now they're back at mainly at Target. I noticed, but they're back. But yeah, before I recommend watch that because I think it's where he's getting a lot of his stuff here, but I'm not sure he's quite reading it right. So let's go ahead and get into his thing, and pause and deal with it here. So here we go.
Just how important are Star Trek merchandise sales to the overall franchise? Is it true that the combined power of the 143 official licensees of Star Trek merchandise could put a show like Picard on hold for set, costume, and prop redesigns because they refuse to make merchandise for it? It's an interesting question, and one not easily answered. To do so, what I think we really need to do is get a grasp on the current state of Star Trek merchandise as a whole. And to do that, let's start from the beginning. One of the earliest deals made by then Star Trek production studio Desilu was with AMT. Known for making models, AMT started producing a small-scale replica of the USS Enterprise, which by all accounts became a fan favorite.
Okay, couple points here. That model of the Enterprise is not the original model they put out. In fact, that model first came out in the early 90s. It's about 22 inches long, and there are problems with that. And that's not even the original issue. That's the reissue they just put out this past year or so. That Round 2 put out. The original, I don't know how. Obviously, he's pulling a lot of stuff from that Toys That Made Us thing. And he said that was the only picture he came up with. He didn't look very hard. So it's kind of hard to take a lot of terribly seriously. It'd be basic research, with this. So I'll put some pictures up of, let's see, the first issue of the Enterprise model from '66. About 18 inches long. It's a classic, and they sold over 1 million units in the first year. And it's been figured that was the most from the start to finish. When it went into the long box, and then the short box, which we're all familiar, most of us are familiar with. I won't get into the last one because that one's case they didn't bother to hide the fact that we know the decals are crap. Here they are. But let's start to finish. The most successful model kit, at least of a science fiction subject of all time. And they just kept they wore out the molds. That's why I got a big change in the mid '70s with they had to redo the molds. And unfortunately, they made it easier to build, but they also ruined what little accuracy the cat had. And they still kept these 3 little dimples on underside of the primary hull, which I'll never understand why they were there in the first place. I figured there had to be something to do with the mold itself, because it makes no sense whatsoever.
They also stepped in to help build the shuttle Galileo used on set during filming of the original series.
But yeah, basically the AMT deal basically was this. Because they were flying around for merchandise things, because in TV series, with merchandise stuff that was established. Again, board games, toys, stuff like And I imagine Man from U.N.C.L.E. they were doing with the Uncle Gun, And in fact, the phaser rifle from Where No Man's Gone Before, that was brought to them from a toy maker as a possible thing, and that was kind of product placement ahead of time to put it out there and see what it's like. And the deal fell through, so we took the phaser rifle, went home, and it just recently came up again and put up for auction. But a lot of people wonder what the hell happened to that phaser rifle. Yeah, it turns out the guy took it home. But they were always on the lookout for something. But Roddenberry wasn't always the greatest mind when it came to merchandising too. There's some things he could have done that would have made them a little better. For instance, he eventually nixed the idea of a phaser rifle, and it's in the writer's guide, where you'd have the phaser one, the little handheld thing, the phaser two pistol, and then the phaser, the razor rifle would be to slip the pistol into a rifle stock, a la the special Uncle Gun. And he dropped the ball on. He said, "Nah, I'm not gonna bother. Not gonna bother with that." I don't know if they were fully designed. I designed my own version of what I thought they would have come up with. And generally, the reaction, yeah, that looks like what he would come up with.
However, it wasn't long before the first merchandising misstep took place. Once Paramount took over corporate ownership of the show's production in 1967, a new licensee was brought into the mix to start generating much-needed revenue: Remco Toys. Remco's approach was simple: place a literal Star Trek sticker onto existing toy products and market them to the show's fans as official merchandise through a process simply known as label slapping.
Star Trek wasn't always the easiest show to merchandise. That's why you got some of the weirder stuff, because well, you're not giving us that, we'll do it ourselves. You got Remco doing the Astro tank and the Astrocopter, and then the parachuting figures, and the tracer guns. The tracer guns, I remember when I was a little kid. I think the show either was still on the air or just been canceled a year or two before. I remember that, and I knew it. Those aren't phasers, And it turns out, yeah, they've been selling those things for years before, but now they slapped the Star Trek name on it. And, they're fun little guns. They sold them for years and years, even after they dropped the Star Trek label. They're still selling them. You can actually shoot a penny to one of those. The little disc about the size of a penny. It doesn't go very far because the spring's not that strong. But if you got a real old gun, good strong spring. But they're always looking for ways, because Roddenberry's in this to make money. Yeah, the philosophical thing and the issues are one thing, but he also it's gotta be entertaining and make some money, or it's not worth it.
Things didn't improve for the show, even after its cancellation. And from 1969 to 1976, Paramount started pumping out every single piece of merchandise under the sun, including but not limited to chalkboards, disc shooters, freesicles, parachute Kirk and Spock, and this fucking thing. It is important to note that while certain aspects of the Trek merchandise was being handled rather poorly, the Trek apparel was starting to sell out all across the nation, partly due to the increase of fan conventions.
Left out of this whole thing about merchant is the models. The models were perennials. They were constants. The Enterprise model continued to sell, and all the thing. And it was also in the early 70s when the Exploration kit came out. I'm not sure why he's focused on Trek apparel. The only mass market Trek apparel out there was the shirts by Don Moore. I had one. I wish I still had it, even though I would never prayer. But I'm like to find one. Something kind of like when a Novos announced they were going to start making these for adult sizes. Yes, okay. I'll wait for the long sleeve version this time though. So. But yeah, that's the only Star Trek. Otherwise, T-shirts and everything at the time, that was all garage stuff. That was unlicensed, or if it was licensed, it was back when Paramount didn't care. The license was dirt cheap. But it was very, not really what I call official stuff. Okay, it was like Spock for President T-shirts, and Star Trek Lives. The real thing, again, I don't know why he totally is the model kits. AMT was making a mint on those Star Trek models kit. Like I said, they wore out the molds for the Enterprise. They're making so damn many kits. Okay. And again, there's a whole. I'll put links on there. The whole series Jay Claudic did on history of the Enterprise kit. He's like a 5 or 6 part, very exhaustive thing on the history of that kit and the various. I'll put those in the description down below.
Star Wars, released in 1977, took some time to properly capitalize on their toy and merchandising market, but once it did, the profit margins for Mego and the Trek brand were cut by a reported 75%. Desperate to reignite their merchandising sales and to capitalize on the new resurgence of space fantasy films, Paramount greenlit Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
We are aboard a huge starship called the Enterprise. This is the return of Captain Kirk.
An alien object of unbelievable destructive power is less than 3 days away from this planet.
This ultimately proved to be another misstep.
Okay, I think it's time to address this. Here's what we're going for here. There had been pushes to bring back Star Trek almost from the day that the cancellation was announced. Before the last episode even aired, they were trying to say. And in fact, if Leonard Nimoy had not already signed to join Mission Impossible, CBS was ready to pick up the show for a 4th season. Which is not unheard of. CBS has a habit of picking up NBC's cast-offs and making them into hits, actually. So, and I suspect CBS might have been a little easier to deal with, creative-wise. But they had been, it had been back and forth through the years. I mean, that's why we got an animated series in the first place in '73, because of the push to bring back, and that was why it was on NBC, because they still had pretty much had the rights on. But it had been going back and forth. Was it going to be a TV series, a low-budget movie, a mini-series, a movie of the week, a not so, but and that's where we get into Phase 2 and the development through that.
20 years before the debut of the United Paramount Network in 1995, the studio's effort to launch a second Star Trek series called Phase 2, as well as a new television network, led to Star Trek's leap to the big screen. This journey from the original television series to the first Star Trek film carried the cast and crew as far as their imagination, skill, and special effects technology could take them.
And they had like an entire season's worth of episodes written up and sets built, and they were dragging out old costumes, and they would have been in original series uniforms if they got them with this. That's why all the screen test footage you see, they're in original series uniforms. A lot of them were original, and some recreations and stuff with like half of uniform. The phasers would have been pretty close to the originals. Yeah? They were just slightly reworked a bit. And meanwhile, while all this is going on, then Star Wars hits. And initially, they feared, well, that's it. We've lost it. We've lost our shot because Star Wars took all the thunder. But then Close Encounters, this is the thing a lot of people miss. Close Encounters comes out around the same time and does just as well. That was a bit of a revelation. You mean these guys will go to more than one movie in a year of this type? Okay, then we're back on.
Series that had been announced to be the linchpin of the Paramount Television Network. It was the new Star Trek series. They were redesigning the Enterprise, building sets. They were commissioning scripts. They were having meetings. They were figuring out what life was going to be like in the 23rd century and what the new communicators would be.
Production tests of what the engine room would look like, doing makeup tests of what Leah would look like.
And August 3rd, 1977, which was less than 2 months after Phase 2 had been announced, there was a meeting which included Michael Eisner and Bob Goodwin, Gene Roddenberry, and everyone else involved in the production of the show. And Bob Goodwin pitched to Michael Eisner the story In Thy Image by Alan Dean Foster. And Bob Goodwin says that at that meeting, Michael Eisner heard the story and he slammed his hand down on the table and he said, "Gentlemen, we've been looking for a Star Trek motion picture for 5 years, and this is it."
Now again, at this point, movie merchandising was pretty much a black hole. There had been this Jaws games and nothing from a movie had ever really done anything. So this wasn't a merchandising angle here. This was trying to make a big bunch of money for the studio through the movies, through the box office. And again, to call it a misstep is really, it's really a slap in the face to a lot of this stuff, because I'll throw some stuff up here, from the documentaries on thing, but there's a lot of stuff that got built up because of this movie. And in fact, pretty much it's the linchpin of the when it became more than just the original series and the animated, and it became the franchise, as it was called.
After the stunning success of the first motion picture, Star Trek was firmly established as a tentpole franchise for Paramount and led to a series of popular films. Star Trek the Motion Picture went on to become a major box office success, generating multiple motion picture sequels, new television spin-offs, and a merchandising empire that thrives to this day.
It was a very finely crafted film, and it did well. But from the actor's point of view, frankly, it was frustrating. We didn't feel that we were getting to play the characters that we enjoyed playing in the way that we knew how to play them. And it was frustrating for Gene Roddenberry, too. It wasn't the story or script he had wanted, and the gaps seemed filled with too much emphasis on special effects. But the film did very well, and Paramount decided they'd like to try again. They and Roddenberry agreed to bring in a new producer, a man named Harve Bennett, to see if he could bring back together the original elements that gave us the fun, the excitement, and the chemistry between the cast, while keeping the special effects in their proper perspective.
Reviews were mixed. One critic said the film consisted of spaceships, which take an unconscionable amount of time to get anywhere, and nothing of dramatic or human interest happens along the way. Other critics disagreed. One said it's a search and destroy thriller that includes all the ingredients the show fans thrive on. The film was an enormous success, and it made 17 million in the first week. It made well over 139 million worldwide, and it was the 5th highest grossing film of 1979. Paramount were unfortunately disappointed as far as expectation went. The budget of 46 million was a massive cost. Added to the cost by the studio was the amount it cost to make the scrapped Phase 2 pilot. Roddenberry was blamed by the studio for many rewrites, and the direction he took with the film as far as the slow pace of the film, but regardless the studio backed a sequel. Roddenberry, however, would lose his creative control on the next film, which was probably a smart move.
You gotta go by the standards of the studio for it to be declared a success or a failure. And by the standards of the studio, yeah, it succeeded. It was a gamble because of the extra price tag on it. And at that point, you really hadn't had movies based on failed TV shows. And it was considered a failure at that point. Even 3 seasons, it's not exactly a rise of success. It's not an utter failure. Not like My Mother the Car, the movie, but it wasn't. It didn't exactly go out with a blaze of glory. It kind of whimpered off on and I think that's another subject. But even with with the runaway success in syndication and the constant berating by us fans to bring it back, they were still taking a bit of a chance there. Would these fanatics show up? Was a concern, and we did in big numbers. I've lost count how many times I saw it in the theater. Although I can tell you the first time was my dad actually pulled me out of school. I was in the middle of geometry class when I got a call that go to the front office, and my dad says that we're going to see the movie. It's like, okay, I was not expecting that. I figured maybe see it in the weekend, but yeah, it was the Friday, December 7th, and we went to see the movie at the Lake Ridge Twin Theater. But yeah. And it made the opening weekend. It pretty much made the money back They're certainly made back enough for the pretty much pretty much made it back its budget within the first week or so, and it very quickly became a profitable film.
In 1979, the motion picture was released to poor critical reviews and a lack of interest from audiences.
Lack of interest from audiences that know the fact that again, somebody was buying those tickets. Somebody made this movie one of the biggest money makers of the year. So yeah, lack of interest in the audience is, I'm sorry, that's total crap. Look at where Star Trek Motion Picture is. And you still want to say this wasn't a successful movie? No, it was a successful movie. It wasn't as successful or as satisfying as they wanted it to be, but it succeeded quite well. That's why we had a Star Trek 2 and 3 and 4, and because that first movie blew everyone's socks off, in a lot of ways.
Paramount and Gene Roddenberry both failed to understand who their target audience was and did not capitalize correctly on the success of Star Wars' more fantasy-style approach.
I think they were still trying to get a handle on well, as far as merchandising goes, they were still trying to figure out who the audience was that was buying this stuff. Now, granted, I was in high school in 79. I was 15. But as that kind of movie, not necessarily going to light the fires of little kids. And the adult collector market really wasn't there yet. We had to grow up to turn into it. But there are things they could have done better. I think if they put out because the only phaser toys that was the laser tag thing. I think if they just put out a decent phaser and wrist communicator. It took them to Playmates in the 90s before we finally got a phaser and communicator from the motion picture. So there was still a learning curve here, Still trying to figure this stuff out.
This failure would prove catastrophic, as Mego overproduced Trek toys for the film to try to recapture their market, but would ultimately lead to the company closing down.
There's a lot more to it than the fact that Marty got got found guilty of several counts of fraud and obstruction of justice and a few other things there, and he had to. So there's a lot more to it. They didn't help, And as far as overproducing, I didn't see a lot of this stuff out there, Frank. If they've been overproducing, I think I would have had a little more.
Because of the motion picture's failure and the lack of merchandising sales, Paramount would go on to miss the mark for every single Star Trek film up until around the film Star Trek 2009, by either overproducing for films that didn't sell well or underproducing for fan favorites.
Here's the problem with merchandising from a movie, and also, let's take a look at this here for a second. This Kirk and Spock figure, that is a new thing there. That's a recent issue. That is not from the time of these movies came out. Look, I think that may be an artist. If it's not playing, it's artist item or something. It's a new thing. And this one up here, I think that's Amanda. That is a Playmates figure. Again, by the time you get into the later movies, now Playmates in there, but then, yeah, that crew there, the Ertl thing. I'm not sure about that. It's one of the reasons why marketing to movies is a pain, because movies are still, even if it's a part of a long-going series, they're still pretty much one-offs. One could be a hit, one could be and the thing is, yeah, Star Trek motion picture, not a big hit. Not the kind of thing that would generate toy sales. So the next movie comes along, and you got to do pretty much in advance. You got to be ready to jump in and have toys on the shelves when the movie opens. You can't sit back and wait until the thing is a hit, because by then you missed your moment. It's too late. And that's why there was nothing out for Star Trek 2, because they felt they got burned on 3, on 1. They didn't do for 2. 2 was a big hit. Okay, fine. Now they jump on the bandwagon for 3. 3 doesn't do the same kind of thing, and then those toys don't do much. And look at this stuff also. It's like now they're trying the G.I. Joe type of figure, it looks like. There you got Krug and his, I guess that's supposed to be his lizard. But again, it wasn't the kind of movie that would generate a whole lot of thing. At least not the stuff they were putting out. Again, if they had put out a decent phaser or communicator, then they would have gotten some. But it's still a developing market at this point. But the movies were always a problem because they were always up and kind of uneven. I don't. The even odd curse is overblown because 1 was more of a not the big romping one, but it was still it's a decent movie, especially if you get the director's decision. 2 was a popcorn flick. 3 was a little more thoughtful. 4 again, big box, big crossover success, and then 5, that's where the myth came in of the odd even curse. That's the only one that really was kind of dopey movie. And then 6 comes on into the hideout, but again, the up and down, up and down. And by the time of 6, though, because Playmates came into the thing pretty soon after Galoob did. When they started kicking out stuff, then they're doing stuff, and they're going back to the movies. And then you start getting some, like these guys up here with the Kirk and Spock figures. And I think that's actually an art asylum thing. Yeah. I think I'm sure that's Diamond Select art asylum stuff there. So this shouldn't even be up here.
While Paramount continued to trip over itself on the big screen, things were not faring any better for the small screen. In 1987, Galoob is hired to create toys for the Next Generation show that was just starting out, which everyone hated. They looked terrible, made little sense in design choices, and ultimately fell flat. Merchandising revenue was looking bleak for the Star Trek brand.
And that was a kid, and the guy in that Toys That Made Us Special, they didn't know who the market was for this thing. And again, the adult collectible market is like, yeah, the hardcore con-going fans knew the adults are out there, but even then, we couldn't say, if there are big enough numbers for a major toy line to support. And so, yeah, Galoob, the stuff was crap. The little diecast Enterprise, I got that. I still have that. The diecast Enterprise, you can separate the stars. That was kind of fun. And it was proportional. It looked good. The phaser they put out was ridiculous. It was about the phaser one they put out was bigger than this mouse. Okay, the thing was ridiculously huge. And again, the figures were not particularly awe-inspiring, and that's why very quickly they brought in Playmates, and Playmates had been at this for a while. And I think with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle line, they had a better idea because we're talking the same general audience here, comic book geeks. So they think okay, we know who's buying this stuff now. Now we know who to market, and that's when you start getting the good action figures and the playsets and the ships and the phasers.
However, after a decade of one failure after another,
I don't know about a decade. Okay,
the lithium was struck once again, this time in the form of licensing deals with Playmates Toys. In 1989, Playmates Toys officially picked up the merchandising license from Paramount, and it began a renaissance of Star Trek toys, creating high-quality items, ships, replica props, and action figures.
Okay, set us up 1989. That's second season of Next Generation. That's not a decade of failures here. Okay, well. This is as far as Next Gen is going. That's just like 2 years. Because if you're going to start going the entire line, But yeah, and again, it's not fair to lump in the movies with the show because merchandise for TV shows have been established since the 50s. Okay, with Davy Crockett. Movies are a different thing. Movies are harder to market for. Star Wars is a bit of an oddity in that. Okay, you didn't see a whole lot of stuff for Close Encounters, did you? And that made just about as much money as Star Wars did in the box office.
The creation of a new Star Trek show also boosted overall sales to the aging Star Trek apparel line, which could now begin selling merchandise featuring the new show and crew and their uniforms.
I think he's coming back to apparel. I think now we're finally seeing officially licensed stuff in the stores now. It's no longer, somebody, cracking out, iGrok Spock t-shirts in their garage and selling them at conventions.
In 1994, Playmate decided to ramp up their attempt at creating more exclusive and limited edition toy lines within the Star Trek franchise. This was done with the intention of reducing their footprint of the larger production of toys into more selective high-end items.
Playmates figures always, from the very beginning, had a little number stamped on the bottom of the foot. They had a little number on their foot. They've always had that little collector mentality on them. That's one of the things. When they did its things, they bought into the speculator or speculeech aspect that had been infecting all of fandom at that point. It's the same idiocy that almost destroyed the comics industry, and they never have recovered. They're still to this day, and still doing the same damn mistakes, back with variant covers and all this stuff, and going strictly for the direct market and forgetting about the mass market. They abandoning the newsstand was the worst thing the comics industry ever did, and going strictly for direct to market, because now they've cut themselves off and they are slowly dying, rather horrible death. And the Playmates that with the 1701 series and the really limited stuff, they started playing into that thing. And something that occurred to me, it's like, you don't get any money from the secondary market, jackasses. Why are you doing this? Okay. You need to market these, and the big bridge states. I got those at the store. That wasn't so much. It was the stuff that's only available at, like, San Diego Comic-Con. That is when people really start getting irritated, because even then it was a pain in the ass just to get to Comic-Con in the first place, and to try and get one of these things, like, or one was at San Diego. One of them is at some kind of event down in Huntsville, Alabama, at Space Camp or something. And it's like, that's when people really start getting irritated. Target exclusive, that's fine. There's plenty of Targets. Not even get to Huntsville. Okay.
Unfortunately, this move had unintended consequences, as many fans were left with incomplete sets because they were unable to purchase them in the limited times they were being offered. Fans at the time had strong desire for a completed set, and resented Playmates for not giving them the opportunity to do so. This situation is regarded by some as the catalyst that kicked off the collector mentality within the Trek fandom as well, and shifted the overall focus for future merchandisers.
It's not so much kicked it off as played into what was already there, and it's and sort of exacerbated it a bit. But also, it's like, there's also something in comics. It was kind of called the ElfQuest effect, where they just put out one too many ElfQuest titles, and they just couldn't keep up with it anymore. So they noticed that when readers, they not only would not buy the new ElfQuest title, they would drop all the ElfQuest titles they were already buying. That bit them in the ass hard. Because, like, in the case of Marvel, it's like they're putting like 10 Spider-Man titles, and it's like, that's it, out, Because they also kind of made it clear that you had to read all of them to find out what's going on with Spidey, so like, fine, out. So not only are they not buying, the Untold Tales of Spidey, they're no longer buying Web, they're no longer buying Amazing, they're no longer buying, So I think that's a big part of it there. That's, it's like, you can't, just, fine, done. I got my set.
Frustration with Playmates' handling of the limited edition toys grew, and by 1999, with almost 400 unique Star Trek items created, Playmates dropped their license agreement. Learning from Playmate's mistakes, in 2001, Art Asylum, later to be known as Diamond Select Toys, produced their first set of high-end Star Trek merchandise utilizing computer scanning technology. This technology enabled the company to create highly detailed sculpts of props, costumes, ships, and cast members. Inventory for these items weren't as expansive as a generic toy line, but nor were they as restrictive as Playmate was doing back in the 90s. This struck a middle ground with production, which seems to be well received by fans.
Advances in technology and the market had changed. It was now a lot more focused on specialty shops and stuff. So and Toys R Us was at this point kind of falling apart. Mostly not their fault, because thank you Bain Capital and you idiots trying to saddle a company with somebody else's debt and wondering why things fell apart. But yeah, a lot of it was now going to the special comic shops and things like that. So yeah, you can be a little more highbrow and a little more niche, but still, I think KB Toys is still around, and again Toys R Us. So they start putting out the phasers and very good phasers and communicators. Like I was pointing out in that special, they used an Art Asylum phaser in the Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly, because it was a very again, probably in a way more accurate than the original props, because the original props are handmade and very rough and not always even, whereas this is nice, evenly made. It's even same side to side. Properly wasn't a wooden, they were on a fiberglass copy of a wooden mold. No, it was a properly made thing. It was a good dang phaser, and finally, and now you can say that this phaser is screen accurate because it's the same one they used on Enterprise. So.
This approach, arguably, furthered the disconnect from more traditional toy sales towards the higher-end Trek collectibles.
I wouldn't say it furthered the gap. I think it actually bridged the gap. Because there's no way in hell I can afford a Master Replica's phaser. I've got like 2 or 3 Art Asylum ones, though. That's the thing. An Art Asylum phaser is like $20, $30. Whereas, Quantum Mechanics or, Master Replicas like $300. And God forbid you breathe on it funny or it falls into a million pieces. So.
Granted, Paramount and Bad Robot attempted to re-enter the merchandising fray, and more specifically the toy market, with their film Star Trek 2009. They even went back to veteran Trek toy company Playmates to help guide their global toy sales agenda. However, this deal was quickly canned due to reported quality control disputes between the various companies involved.
And here's where we start getting into separate licenses. Yes, this is where we get the, because, again, by this point, this is now where you get the Viacom CBS split. But until this point, everything had been chugging along fine. No one really noticed anything different. Now it becomes, where the rubber hits the road. Because now Paramount can't just put out stuff because, because now they no longer have clear license to the property. They had to license it from CBS. Because the only thing they had clear license to was the previous movies, but they couldn't do anything with them except just re-release them on home video or in the theater. So if they want to do more, they had to license it and they had to make it distinctly different. And again, this is where the 25% thing comes in, because that's the requirement. It had to be at least 25% different than the established property over at CBS. And you add in the factor that apparently, again, JJ and Bad Robot are pains in the ass to deal with on these sort of things, because they're the insane levels of secrecy and stuff, and just not knowing to nail down any details of it. And apparently something had happened, because the figures apparently didn't look that great. They didn't look much like the characters. And they didn't really look like, even just compared to one of the JJ Trick figures to an earlier Playmate, the articulation's all just weird. And I think the only thing that really sold on that line was the Enterprise and the phaser, because everyone likes guns, and the ships are always decent sellers. Other than that, I saw again all the figures are on clearance pegs. The communicators and the tricorders were in the clearance pegs because they were just, again, a lot of times people like to describe some kind of strange significance. What does this mean for them? It means you put out a lousy product and no one wants to buy it.
Now, we are back at the present. As of now, Trek merchandise isn't being produced primarily by simple toy companies, but by collectible juggernauts like Eagle Moss, Diamond Select Toys, and McFarlane.
I don't know about calling them juggernauts per se. Eagle Moss, they do very low runs, sometimes, and they do ships. That's all they do, the ships. But there's always a market for the ships. But there's also indications of that separate license thing coming again because they don't come in. A Discovery ship doesn't come with it like all the other ships. So they have just Star Trek and then listen to the shows and what. They come in their own special marking on the box of Star Trek Discovery. So another indication there's a special license at work here. Diamond Select and McFarlane. I don't know of a single product either of those companies is putting out connected to Discovery. McFarlane announced a phaser and some figures, but so far, no. In fact, either they've just not come or they've out and out canceled them. For the simple fact of nobody wants it. Lack of interest. They want, and McFarlane Toys is no slouch. They've been doing action figures since, he was doing his own Spawn figures back in the day. Some of the nice looking figures out there. But so he knows how to do basic market research, and if nobody wants anything to do with Discovery, he ain't gonna put it out. He's not gonna market something that no one wants to buy. Okay, he's there to make money. And so yeah, they announced a phaser and I think of some of the figures from the show, but then subsequently canceled them afterwards. They got the rest of the Star Trek license. They'll make money on it, but they're not putting any Discovery stuff out. And again, I don't know of anything from Diamond Select. I haven't seen anything announced from them at all. But Eagle Moss, yeah, they'll do ships, but they also operate on very low run stuff there, and they're like $30-40 a piece anyway. But they're also they got the entire line, every Star Trek, and they also have other license lines too. They do Galactica stuff too, and other movie stuff.
And while some outlets would have you believe that Trek merchandise is in a slump, or that Star Trek Discovery, for that matter, has no merchandise available to purchase at all, the opposite would be true. From shirts and jackets, to pins, to ships, to books, to pops, and more sophisticated character models, Discovery and the rest of Star Trek does have plenty of merchandise available all around the internet. While it is true to say that Trek has a lack of presence inside of brick-and-mortar stores, there are dozens of websites selling Trek-related items, including over 15 websites selling Discovery merchandise.
That Burnham model, that little thing there, I think it's one of those that's been announced, but no one's actually put it out. The novels are just part of the same thing Pocketbooks has always been putting out. This stuff over here, the ship on there, that's more the Eagle Moss stuff. Pins are, cheaper to produce. And the shirts, I'd like to see some sales figures on these things, but just because someone puts it out doesn't mean it's going to sell. And Gentle Giant Limited, I think, this is talking a very low run, probably, like very high end specialty. It's like, they might sell 10, for like $300 each. Figure they'll find 10 people to buy buy these things somewhere. Oh yeah, these collector pins. These are pins. These are all pins here. I think they're just pins. It's a far cry from model kits in hobby shops or action figures on the pegs at Target. They're not there. That's your main marketing, and they're not showing up. So yeah, as far as this, and whereas I am seeing original series figures again. Yeah, Marty's back with Mego, probably in connection with Diamond Select, but he's doing original Star Trek figures again, along with other series. He's got Brady Bunch and Married with Children, and I think they may bring some of the old, Planet of the Apes stuff. But yeah, they are doing original Star Trek again, and some of the variants. It's Mirror Universe, and he's got Stulu and Chekhov, and so. So yeah, there is Star Trek merchandise out there, but original series and other stuff. There is no Discovery merchandise out on the shelves, and that is where if it's not in the mass market, that's why there's still people out there. There's a new Star Trek show. They never heard of Discovery. They have no idea the show's even out there. That's one thing we need to remember, that we live in our little bubble here in fandom. The mundanes don't have a clue what's going on out there, and they're sure as hell aren't seeking this stuff out, because you got this kind of almost a Funko Pop figure of Burnham here. It's like, and you got a handful of books and novels out as part of the overall Star Trek line, the pocketbook Star Trek line. That's not a big deal, because they're not the only books. It's not like somebody Discovery books. Yeah, so let me tell you something. There were 4 novels on the verge of coming out related to JJ Trek, and Bad Robot pulled the plug on them at the last second. Now the authors, they got paid anyway. I think the books are already printed and on the way to the stores. And Bad Robot came in and said, "No, cancel," because they didn't want anything contradicting their stuff. That's the kind of thing of how much a pain in the ass they are to deal with. Now maybe they learned a bit and they're not standing in the way of Discovery, but nobody's wanting to buy that. I'm pretty sure that burner figure, I think, has been canceled. I think it's just an old material. Or they're trying to get somebody to show some interest in it, but if the shirts here, if this is like a Cafe Press type thing, I got stuff on my Cafe Press. I mean, just because I put a pattern up on a shirt doesn't mean it's going to sell. Yeah. So be careful what you're looking for here, because you're not necessarily seeing what you think you're seeing.
It's important to understand as well that the merchandising landscape has shifted over the last 50 years since Star Trek has been around. The Trek brand, at least for right now, seems to be focused on apparel, which has been a consistent selling point for Star Trek throughout the years. Their high-end collectibles, DVD and Blu-ray box sets, and board games, all being sold direct-to-consumer through online shopping.
Again, he completely ignores the model kits, which have been a constant seller throughout the whole thing. The only time they weren't selling is when they weren't there. During that brief little period when AMT kind of ceased to exist for a while, and nobody had picked up the license. And it kind of took, for basically people to, buy back round 2 and bring them back and get those licenses back. But that's it. Otherwise, Enterprise kits have always been the model kits have always been sellers. Even the slightly lackluster ones, we still buy because they do kit bashing.
So, taking into consideration the long troubled history of Star Trek merchandising, its shift to more collectible items in the mid-90s, and the current merchandising landscape of 2019, you need to ask yourself, would a show featuring the return of one of the most popular captains in Star Trek, Jean-Luc Picard, be put on hold because a few of the licensees were upset over the sets and the props?
Yes, it is. They're still pissed. And before we come back, well, it's in production. Kurtzman's doing this on his own. He is not authorized by CBS to do anything. And all he's doing, apparently, is just second unit stuff that doesn't use any of these designs. But he's gone rogue, basically, which is within the realms of his contract. He's authorized to do stuff like this on his own, but he's He's reaping he's sowing the wind here. If they don't turn this around and get this going, yeah, he'll reap the whirlwind. Because CBS, all they have got, they're not getting enough merchandising money from Discovery because they did not have anything appreciable. I mean, you had some T-shirts on StarTrek.com, and that's really about it. So, and this is from what used to be $1 billion a year franchise with figures and toys and models, and nothing was coming out in connection with this show. Everything that come out that was selling was with the original canon, original series, Next Gen, and also, and CBS is getting all of that. So yeah, they're not hurting as far as that goes because they're still selling. But as far as Discovery goes, it's not bringing in the bacon. It's not bringing in the viewers. And nobody was wanting to put out this stuff. They put the designs out, and the same thing before. They couldn't give this stuff away. The ship design was hideous. That's why it was rejected back in the 70s in the first place. That's why they brought in Matt Jeffries on his days off from Little House on the Prairie to redesign the Enterprise, because what they had done before, it's like, no, that's not the Enterprise. So, and why you keep hearing the same art? Because it's the same damn thing. Kurtzman and his bunch refuse to learn. They're putting out designs that nobody wants. I'll be interested to see what the sales figures are on the Discovery model they put out. And it's a dinky little snap kit model. You don't even need to paint it because it's like molded in color, and then the decals cover every square inch of that poor thing. If you really want to light it, yeah, it's got some clear parts and run a little wire up to the stand, and you can do that. But a couple of LEDs and you got a lit ship. But it's not exactly, it ain't the 1-350 Enterprise, okay? So, yeah. They're talking like $400 million invested in this show. They better have some stuff backing it up, like merchandising, licensing, and the licensees aren't biting. So yeah, Kurtzman can do all the second unit stuff he wants. Until they get something that the licensees are going to nibble on, this show's dead in the water. So, yes, is it important? Yeah. In the modern landscape, licensing is still pretty much the lifeblood because they can't, especially this, they can't really rely on. Well, they're doing a streaming service, so their advertising revenue is off the table already because a lot of people are trying to do just some licensing fees to get away from the ads. So yeah.
Without any hard evidence either way, the answer is left up to each of you to decide.
Well, let's be a little specious because only people that have any hard evidence. One, they're scattered to the four winds because they're the ones that have access to the data, but also half of them are under non-disclosure agreements. But the ones that we're talking are not happy. The story is presented. It's like a lot of these licensees are fans themselves, and they also know their fan base and their clientele, and they know they're not biting on this. They didn't like Discovery and what they did to the universe. They sure as hell didn't appreciate the attempted resolution of everything, which didn't resolve a damn thing. And this is looking like more of the same. And that's why you're getting the same arguments, because it's the same damn problem. So, PayPal, Patreon down below. We'll talk at you later.